How much can we discover about the beauty of love and the character of God through the Song of Songs? Guys, this is Systematic Geekology. We are the Priests of the Geeks, bringing you a special episode today on YouTube about something we have covered before, but that needs your help. We are once again talking to Simon, who is going to introduce us once more to the Word for Word Bible comic. Simon, how are you doing today?
Hi, thanks. I'm good, thanks, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We are also joined today by Joe Day. How are you doing, Joe?
Good. Glad to be here.
All right, guys. Real quickly, what have we all been geeking out on before we head to the meat of this conversation?
You go, Jay.
Okay. I just saw Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and it was phenomenal. Very, very good.
Oh.
Okay. First positive review I've heard of it. I'm glad to hear that.
I've been geeking out. I saw an offer which was for the Warhammer Plus, channel thing. It's normally £5 a month, and but it was on for £2. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll have it for a month for £2, and I'm going to watch all their Warhammer animations. So 40k, Space Marine sort of stories and all that stuff. So that's what I've been doing this weekend.
Excellent. I just watched last night one of the most recent releases, which is Unseen, which for those who don't know is a horror movie based on the premise of a woman who is nearly blind, has to call someone she doesn't know to help her guide herself in the forest after her boyfriend has kidnapped her. And I got to say, it fulfills its premise pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not big on certain other aspects of the film. This is not a review section of the show, but I'd say Unseen is worth your time. Just get ready for some things you're going to roll your eyes at. All right. So that's that. We're going to move into our main discussion for tonight. This is, of course, the Word for Word Bible comic. So, Simon, lead us away. What is this about? How are you involved? Let it all out.
Well, the Word for Word Bible comic is a graphic novel series which includes every word from the Bible. So each book has every word included. It's got three sort of unique selling points, which is that it's historically accurate. So it's all the real places, weapons and armor from the time period and that sort of thing. It's historically accurate. It's unabridged, so we've got every word. We don't cut bits out or change it. And the way that it works is the words you don't really need, like he said and stuff like that, appear in between the panels. So they're subtly included, but as you read it, you can skip over those things. But if you want to, you can go into a bit more depth and read those bits that have been put into the gutter spaces. And then finally, it's untamed. So we don't cut bits out or change the story to make it good for kids. It's intended to just give you the story exactly how it's told, and it's aimed at sort of adults and teens primarily.
Excellent. So right now you are doing a Kickstarter for your latest project, which is the Song of Songs / Song of Solomon, depending on who's going to be writing the name for that book. Where can they find you on Kickstarter, and do you have any other place that they can look you up?
Probably the easiest place to access everything is just through the website, and that includes, the Kickstarter. So it should be easy to find. It's just word for word, biblecomic.com. And then on the homepage, the first thing is a link to the Kickstarter there. That'll probably be the easiest place. And then, we've got Facebook groups and Instagram and all that stuff as well. So, but all those things are all linked up through the website. So it should be easy for people to find.
Excellent. All right. So getting into this discussion, what inspired you to start this project to help people visualize the events of the Bible, and who else is involved with this production?
So I became a committed Christian in my 20s, and then reading through the Bible, the NIV Bible, and I just got into so many parts of the Bible where I was like, I never knew this was in here, and this is a lot more bloody and exciting and sort of political and stuff than I was expecting. And I thought to myself at the time, somebody should make this into a completely unabridged, comic book series or something like that, where you get all the visuals and everything. And then I just sort of felt God was saying, well, you do it then. So I started researching if it would work, and and that sort of thing. And as I often say, like with a lot of books like Lord of the Rings or something like that, if you're like, oh, I'm going to make an unabridged Lord of the Rings, it doesn't work because the nature of the book is it's written as a novel. It's lots of descriptions and that stuff. But funnily enough, the Bible works really well. It's like a shooting script. There's people talk. There's not much description of anything. It's just like very bare bones of the information, and so we keep it exactly how it is, but we add all the context of the images of the places, the cities or land, like I say, landscapes in Israel or wherever. And so I do the illustration and the research and all that sort of stuff. And we've got a few other people on the team. So we've got colorists who do the colors, and we've got somebody called Leslie, who's our lead colorist, and her internet sort of artist name is Syndos. And then we've had two new colorists come onto this particular project, the Song of Songs. So it's Laura Morfett and Joshua Brown. So they joined us about a month ago. So that's why I'm like, get those names right. But yeah, so and then my wife that helps as well. So she does all like finance related stuff and posting out all people's orders. And when we do the Kickstarter at the end, getting all those spreadsheets and making them make sense, and then everybody's orders and putting them all in, packaging them all up, and we have all millions of sacks full of people's orders and everything that have to go out to all over the world, like UK, America, everywhere else. So yeah, that's kind of the team, really.
Very good. So Simon, who would you say that this project is intended for, and who do you hope to even reach with it?
Well, it's intended for adults and older teens, sort of age-wise. It's not specifically for either gender. We've found that obviously more like men than women read it, but it's just intended for people who there's different ways that it's applied. So a straightforward way is people who would like to read the Bible but would struggle with plain text Bible. So people who've come to faith, are not very academic or dyslexic or other needs, or even deaf people and things like that who struggle to read a great deal of text. So this can make it more accessible. So there's that. Or there's people who read a lot of comics and they'll read anything. There's Shakespeare comics, Pride and Prejudice, and all this stuff, and they'll just read anything. So having a comic of the Bible just gives them an option then to go and think, oh well, I've read a lot of other stuff. I'll read this as well, and just get access then to people who would otherwise not, walk into a church or pick up a Bible and read it, but might think, oh, I'll give this a go. So that's the kind of the aim is to give access to people who would otherwise not be able to kind of read a full plain text Bible, basically.
Very good. The more opportunities we have to introduce people to the word, I'm all for it. And
Yeah.
This is an excellent way to do that. Like, just as somebody who's only briefly looked at what you have to show, this is fun. Now,
getting a chance to
go ahead.
Getting a chance to follow this over the last year, like we spoke last year when you were when we did an episode, getting a chance to see the continuation of this project, but also see how this project can be valuable to a variety of different people has been pretty cool. You think of, at least in America, and for people that are more in the church environment, you hear of an animated Bible and you think of things like the Action Bible and stuff like that, the stuff that's a little more reductionist and all of that. But I've had several opportunities over the last year to talk to people either that are more of like comic book people, or people that are like you said, not as academic, looking for a different entry point and stuff like that, and be able to show them your work, to be able to say that there's value in understanding that we need to be, as Paul says, all things to all people. And part of that is each person using their talents to be able to provide a different entry point into the into the Bible. And so it's interesting to me to see now that you're tackling this section of scripture, because this is one of those that, while I can see how it almost begs for an adaptation like this, you're also taking on the responsibility of adapting this section of scripture, you know?
Mm. Yeah, it's challenging. So in regards to this section of scripture, I mean, yeah. So obviously, what we're talking about is Song of Songs, and I mean, one of the people who's followed the project for a long time was like, "Oh, how do you feel about this being your first book that's like non-narrative?" But in a way, this book is still narrative, even though it is a poem. But it is different, and there are some unique elements to it. A minor thing is that, as I said at the beginning, a lot of the books, will say he said in the gutter space, and then it'll have the speech bubble, and it'll have it saying it, and so you'll drop a little bit of the text because you don't need it because of the images. But funnily enough, with Song of Solomon, there's actually there's zero words have been dropped, because the whole thing is just a constant stream of poetry and people talking. It doesn't have and then she said to him and da da da. So all the words are in there. In this one, even not in the grey text in the gutters even, but it is a tricky book, and with Song of Songs, it's like I've read lots of commentaries and watched lots of preachers on it and stuff like that, and people have said like there's as many different like opinions and commentaries about Song of Songs, and there are more of those, more varied than any other book. And but I think the more that you study it and the more that you like hold it in tension with the rest of scripture, I think that the story kind of that does come through, and as you begin to understand some of the idioms that are used and what they mean, the actual understanding of the book becomes a lot clearer. And so the problem with Song of Songs is, when you just read it now, particularly as a plain text book, there's no direction, there's no, and it's like the NIV has like he, she, and it sort of tries to give you an indication of who's speaking and stuff, but it's quite hard to know what they're talking about. And and then there's all this imagery as well, like he's like a stag on the hills and all that, and all these sort of examples, and and you just get lost. So sometimes they're like obvious what they mean, like I don't know, he's got hair like a raven or something, and it's pretty straightforward. But other times you're like, what are they going on about? And actually the more you understand it and get to know these idioms, the more that the story is pretty straightforward. And so what we've done with the book is we've had to interpret it in one specific way, and there's essentially three schools of thought on the book, which is one that's non-narrative, which is like it's just like a bunch of bits of poems that have been pushed together, and there is no narrative and all that stuff. And I don't agree with that. Another one is that there's three people in the story, and another one is there's two. The two, which is the one we've done, it's the most sort of straightforward. There's a bride and a groom, and they love each other, but they meet, and he's in disguise, essentially. She's a common woman. He's essentially dressed as a shepherd. She falls in love with him as a shepherd, and it turns out, he's not just a shepherd, he's a king after all. And then he brings her into the palace, and they get married, and they love each other. And that's the story. So it's a Cinderella story, a Prince and Pauper kind of story. But the other version is that there's the woman, and then there's the king, he's like betrothed to her to bring her into his harem, and she's not that happy about it. And she's got another man who's a common shepherd who she's really in love with. And as she's getting sort of sucked into this whole royal thing, she's like, I wish my lover was here. And then at the end they run off together. And that's how some people interpret it. And but when we draw the comics, we don't. We try to avoid interpreting the scripture, one specific way, and that way is wrong and this way is right. Because when it comes to those two examples, the last two, they in some ways are almost equally valid. And I lean towards the first. So with the man and just the one man woman. So that's how we've done it. But at the end of the book, we've got appendix pages which explain here's the other view, and then we've got list out all the stuff as well, like a dove's eyes, it might point to this, and pomegranates indicate this, and lilies mean this, and these are the things that they are talking about. So as you read in the notes in the back, it helps reinforce that idea. But and obviously I spoke for a bit, but the final thing to say is, but when you have it as a comic and you can see all the things together and who's speaking and what and who they're talking to and all this sort of thing, because you've got that little bit extra context, it just makes it so much easier to read and understand. And with Song of Songs, that's one of the things that's a real challenge, is to actually read it and understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, I'm glad you added an appendix to this, because Song of Songs is a book that could be interpreted in very different ways by very different people. I mean, I'm one of the ones it's straightforward, a love story between this man and woman. Like, I can see the imagery that people suggest, this is God's love for mankind, and, this is Christ loving the church. I can see that, but I'm going to read it more plainly. And I definitely appreciate that. Take more, but definitely having that appendix in the back to say, hey, this could suggest this. Perfect way to include all that.
Yeah, just to give people that, like, this is why people think this other view. But in essence, I then have other pages which essentially load up the whole, like, here's why this first way is the way we're interpreting it. And the more that you read on that, you're like, oh, it's because it's funny, because when you first read the book and you don't really understand it, and then you start listening to people preach on it and stuff, and they're like, this is a story about a woman who's poor and blah blah blah. It's like, well, how did you get that out of the, like what it's talking about and stuff? But as you read it, you're like, oh, it's talking about it being in the vineyards and being tanned and having to work for her brother. Oh, okay, so she is a common woman. She's not like a princess and stuff. You as you read it more carefully, you do pull out the clues which have allowed other people who studied it for over the thousands of years to work these things out.
Awesome. Well, so you mentioned the artwork and everything about that. What is it about art that draws you specifically to like pursuing it? I say that as someone who has no artistic talent whatsoever when it comes to drawing. I can write a novel and plan that out all day long, but don't ask me to use my hands for anything other than typing. Like, what is it about art that draws you to it?
It's a funny one, really, because a lot of people so I do a lot of comic cons and stuff, and you meet various artists, and a lot of people are like, I really love art and I can't stop making it, and I just want to express, this, that, and the other thing. And for me, it's something that I've just, as a child, just basically born with. I was very good at drawing, at a very early age, and just able to draw depth and perspective and all these sorts of things sort of naturally, and it's kind of in a way comes hand in hand with being dyslexic, because you're less good with words but you're better with other things, and in this case better with just being able to like do perspective and stuff like that, just draw things. There's all these rules that you learn about perspective, and obviously you have to kind of go with them. But I tend to draw things freehand, and they go, oh, I better just make sure the perspective's right on this, and then I kind of check it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've drawn it in perspective, even though I didn't really measure out all the lines and all this. And so I've got this like talent which has been given by the Lord to draw. But I did draw as a kid, and I doing D&D and that sort of thing. I used to draw all the time, monsters and characters and this sort of thing. But I never felt like that kind of like, oh, I must draw to express myself or this thing or whatever. It's just very utilitarian. And then when I, like I say, read the Bible, I was like, somebody needs to put this into pictures and context. And the other thing about doing D&D and role playing stuff is I got into LARPing, which is all dressing up in the right costumes of the right era. So I become a history nerd as well. Like, oh, these are the wrong shoes for this type of period, and that's not the right symbols for that Roman army, and that sort of thing. And I was like, this is how doing the comic, this is how we can bring these things together. So art for me is kind of utilitarian. I just draw it because I want to have the images interpretable and to show the visual things. So I'm a visual person, but in essence, I'm using it as a tool to add visuals to the text. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm curious with that difference in how you process information. What has drawing out the different books of the Bible that you've tackled thus far done for processing that particular piece of scripture, for really I guess studying of the scripture as a whole, because like you said about Song of Songs, you have to kind of go through and, okay, so this is how people preach this, and this is how people interpret this, and this is what the common thought is on this. So I would imagine that for each one of the books that you've done so far, it's been a similar approach.
Yeah, and so yeah, and I'm one of these people who here's another sort of plus and minus. So I've got a really good long term memory. So when I've learned stuff about scriptures and stuff, often I can remember it, not necessarily like, oh, this chapter and this verse, but all the kind of reasons why, when I research something in the Bible for a book that I've done, for example, and on the reasons that have been given by different people about these things and different interpretations and all that. And I can remember a lot of these facts quite well. But, on the flip side, I'm terrible short-term memory. So I'm one of these people who walks into a room, can't remember why they went there, can't remember to, just arrange, things that like come up now and again, haircuts and things like that come up every now and again, and you need to sort it out. It's like, well, it doesn't happen, or you need to arrange this before this date because you're going away, and those things go out the window. So it's all short-term memories, sort of related stuff like that. Very hard to remember, but if I basically commit stuff to memory, that's it. I remember it then for a very long time. So in regards to all the books that I've done in the past, I do have very good knowledge of all the little, like, oh, this verse. A lot of the books, people think there's loads of contradictions in the Bible, but there aren't very many. And it's like in a book there'll be like one very famous contradiction, and how do you resolve this contradiction and stuff? And remembering these sort of examples of like where people aren't sure about this verse because does it mean this or does it mean that? There's so few of them that you end up knowing the whys and the wherefores for each one quite well.
Very fascinating. Now, Joe, do you have any artistic talents at all?
Not for drawing. I can't. I'm not even sure I could articulate a stick figure onto the page. But my talents are more for speech and for public speaking.
Fair enough. All right. So, Simon, do you have any artistic inspirations that you really look up to, or maybe you've even inspired what you've done with this project?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest and main inspiration that people can pretty much, if they know who it is, immediately see in the work is the Mike Mignola, who did Hellboy and BPRD and all those comics, and just his artwork is so distinctive and stuff. And it's funny because I never read Hellboy kind of much before I started this project, and I'd read all sorts of other stuff, Marvel and all this stuff, but I hadn't read much of it. And then and when I did read it, because I thought, Hellboy, it's going to be like all offensive and stuff, but it. I mean, for those who haven't read it and maybe watching this thinking, oh, we can't read that, it's actually not about what you think it's about. He's called Hellboy because he's essentially somebody who is born with a sin nature and then is struggling to not succumb to it. And so it's all a bit, in some ways, it's a bit of a like parallel of Christian life in general, but it is all Christian sort of myth in the book as well. So he's fighting, vampires and demons and stuff like that, but with like crosses and that sort of thing. So it's funny, really, but the style of his art is very distinctive. And when I saw it, I thought, I just love it. And then learned to sort of emulate it. And then, but also it works well because it's not like really detailed. So, you know, practically doing loads and loads of books like this with millions of pages, doing it in a style that's quite simple, you know, line art and stuff, and it's not loads of hashing and super realistic stuff. You know, it makes it a lot easier, and that's one of the reasons I chose it. But the other reason is to just, I wanted to identify as well a comic into that kind of American. So it's obviously it's not manga and it's not like British comics and it's not Marvel. It's like, oh, what's the word? I can't remember, but it's like a sort of American indie kind of style. Things like Walking Dead, Hellboy, you know, this kind of Image comics, Dark Horse comics, and things like that. So.
I'm glad you said McGill's name correctly, because on at least 2 separate occasions in the past week, I've had to say his name, and I think I screwed it up again. I can never say his name correctly, and it's been bugging me this whole time. But yeah, that's a great person to look up to art-wise. All right. So you mentioned earlier that you chose specifically the NIV for your translation of the Bible. Like, is there a reason behind that? Was it hard to make that decision?
It was sort of hard in a way. When we first started the project years ago, we were trying to get a translation that would, you know, work, that people knew and all this stuff. And at the time, I was keen to get the NIV translation, but the NIV behind the scenes is very hard to obtain because it's actually split out into 3 different regions. And if you want to license it, you have to get an agreement from the American people, from the sort of European people, and then from the rest of the world people as well. And when we first started, I couldn't manage it. And we actually used the World English Bible at the start, which is a free public domain translation, and it's very good. And there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's what it is. It's the American Standard Version, but with updated syntax and stuff. So instead of ye and all that, it's and so what they did is they just updated the language and then didn't copyright it. But the only problem with the World English Bible is that people haven't heard of it. And so people don't know if it's a good translation or not, or reliable or not, and that sort of thing. Now, we looked at the ESV for a time, but they were like, no, we don't want to, you know, we're not going to let you use it for a comic and stuff. So we didn't get the permission from them. But as far as I'm concerned, there's only a few big names in Bibles, particularly in, like, you know, English, and in America and stuff. So it's like NIV, ESV, and then there's like a couple of others which are like the Living One and the Holman's one and things like that. But it's like it's big in some groups and not in others. Now, I personally really like the NIV Bible, and I've got no problem with it whatsoever. People who are KJV onlyists and stuff, you know, they say, oh, these verses have been dropped out and stuff like that, not really knowing what the difference is, or why they're different in the NIV, or what the reason is that some of the verses are either dropped or but even in the NIV, normally if they are dropped, it has a little A or whatever, and you look down the bottom, it says some versions say this, and so it's not really dropped, it's just in the footnotes.
Yes.
And it's like, so but I just find it the most easy flowing language to use. And so through a load of circumstances, I met somebody from I already knew somebody from the English place. I met somebody at an event from essentially the rest of the world, which is Biblica, and we didn't have the American rights, but those other people had the contacts, so I managed to kind of get hold of everybody. And then there's a minorly little anecdote there where I was trying to obtain the rights in the American one, and they were like, oh yeah, you know, okay, maybe, here's the contract, read it through. And I read it through, and in one section it's like, you can only display the text in 1 column or 2 columns. You can't adjust the, you know, any of the text in any way, or punctuation or anything like that. Or, you know, put it in caps or anything. And I was like, this isn't going to work. So anyway, I went back to him and I said, look, in the contract it says this. Obviously it's like boilerplate stuff that you kept in there. But in this case, we can't abide by that because we're going to be not doing that at all. And I said, also, technically, we're changing the punctuation because sometimes where there's a comma, we're putting a ... and then there's another speech bubble and it'll say ... and it'll carry on. So technically that's changing the punctuation sort of thing. And all these like very minor changes, or things are in caps, so that's technically a change in punctuation. And we're dropping the speech marks because they're in a speech bubble. So it's the same thing, but it's a speech bubble, not a speech mark. Anyway, so I had to send him all these amendments. Like, this is how we would treat the text. We'd have to make all these changes. And then my wife was like, if they agree to this, like, we'll know it's from the Lord because that is impossible. They're never going to agree to this. And then he was like, oh, I'll send it to the committee. And then we were waiting around for ages. And in the end, he's like, right, I've decided I'm just going to agree to it. And then we signed off on it and then it was fine. So, but even though ever since you get the vocal minority of very few people, but some very cross people, oh, the NIV is terrible. I can't believe you use it. But it is still the most popular English translation that there is. It's the best-selling English translation, and most people really like it. But it does have its detractors. But once I'd figured out why people didn't like it, and the fact that they're most of the time it's unfounded, I was like, oh, I should just use this.
Man, what an ordeal! Legalese.
Yeah,
you were a better man than me.
Right.
Actually read the contract
the first time, though. For every book after, I've just been like, can we renew the contract for this book? Can we do this? And yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
I hear that as a pastor, and I'm like, the amount of legal loopholes that you have to jump through to use a translation of the Bible for something, and especially for me, knowing your project and all of that, and knowing how faithful to the source material you guys are, and knowing that other versions have not been. It's insane the amount that goes into it. I mean, I get it from the business part of my brain because you're using somebody else's work, technically speaking, but
yeah. But it is a good translation. One of the people so I've got several people who, I mean, I guess I didn't mention them, but they're the people who I consult with about various things. And one of them's a Bible scholar who I consult with. And he actually is one of the people who helped translate the NIV. It was a consultant for people translating the NIV and things like that. So he has very good knowledge about why certain verses are like, different, or why they're translated in certain ways. So through consulting with him, it's like, okay, I understand what now. But I go to him sometimes and I'm like, because for example, when we did all the Gospels and stuff, Jesus gives loads of, Gospels, and he'll say like, sometimes he'll be like, this man did this and then he said to him, and it's all, okay, well, they're all men. But it's like, for example, the speck in your brother's eye. It doesn't specify what gender the person who's looking in the other eye is. So I was like, so basically I put as many female characters as sort of, I don't like crowbar them in, but where it's either way, I've tried to give an even spread of like male and female sort of people who are in the parables and stuff, because a lot of the time Jesus would just use a Greek word that just means like a human, essentially, like this human did this and blah, 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 and it's not gender specific. It's always assumed that it'd be a man. Like in the language, it's like as a language you would assume it is a man, but technically it's either.
Yeah, someone who's going to be studying Greek next semester. I need to know that. So thanks for the heads up. I can prepare. So right now, correct me if I get any of these wrong. You have done the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, and the book of Song of Songs is your current one. Is there anything else I'm missing?
Oh, so many. Ruth.
Okay.
Esther. Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And I think that's it. And then we did colouring book as well. Oh, and a Christmas book. The Christmas book is like a little book which just combines all the little Christmas verses into a chronological narrative. So we did that at Christmas time.
Awesome. So obviously you want to get all the books right. Well, what do you see as like the end goal for this project?
Yeah, I mean, gradually just to produce all the narrative books first, of which, probably like 70% of the Bible is mostly narrative. And then after that, do some of the other books that work with visuals. Even it's funny because some of the books you think would be like, you never want to do that one, work fine. Like you think, oh, Leviticus would be not that exciting. It's probably not going to be that exciting, but it does work visually because it's like, if this happens, do this, and if this happens, do this, and for this thing that goes wrong, this is a punishment. It's like, well, these are all like things you could potentially draw, so it's not a problem. The only ones that don't work very well is Psalms, because they're not even like, some of them are prophetic, but some of them are just praising God, and you're like, well,
Yes.
what do you draw when, in that context? But when we come to it, that'll probably be one of the last ones we ever do. But half of the Psalms do link to specific historical events, like with David and Hezekiah and all that stuff. So, eventually we'll do them all. And, but yeah, we're starting with all the books that work perfectly for for the narrative and stuff. And yeah, so that's why. And Song of Songs has been a really good one to do, as we were talking about earlier, because but I started it because I do a lot of events, and I say to people, they're not aimed at kids. Some of them are 15 plus, judges, Joshua, and I go to a lot of like a men's conference once a year, and they oh, we should do Song of Songs, eh? Hey, hey, hey. And I'm like, oh, and people joke about it so often. I was like, do you know what? I might do it, and I'm going to go away and read it and figure it out. And I went away and figured it out, and I was like, if I'm not sure what I'm going to do if it's just really, really, unbelievably sexual, and I can't, get around it. But when I read it and then studied it a lot, and then had somebody give me a really good insight into exactly why it's written the way it is, and then I tried to make it into a comic and flesh it out. As I said in my little video on the Kickstarter, it's like, if I had felt that it was unavoidable, that it was all sex, and then I probably would have drawn it that way and put a very high age rating on it. But actually, I realized that even though they are sort of talking about sex a lot of the time, they're talking around the subject, or they're innuendos. He's like, oh, you're a palm tree, I'd like to climb the palm tree and get hold of its fruits and stuff like that. But it's not. But even though he is talking about what you think he is, I think it's done in more tongue-in-cheek kind of a way, that you would, you're having a joke in a sort of song. That's the book has it so that they're kind of singing this song in front at our wedding, like in front of their sort of friends and stuff. So there's a bit of it's like banter almost, like, oh, say the most close to the edge thing that you can say without insulting, like offending the in-laws and stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So was there a specific part of the Song of Songs that you feel like you had to portray it?
The whole thing just begs to be converted into a comic. Once I particularly, as I say, started studying it and really understood, oh, okay, it's actually not that complicated. I was like, this whole thing, because it's not a very long book, it just begs for being converted into a comic, because, as I say, it's really hard to understand when you just read it. But when you see the people and they're talking to each other, and also you can kind of see when there's a scene change, because there is in this, they're talking to each other directly, and then she'll say, oh, but I was a girl in the fields and getting the blood darkened in the sun, and da da da. So she's gone to a flashback. She's talking about before, like ages ago. Oh, I was in the field and my brothers were not very nice to me, and and da da da. And then I met this shepherd, and she's talking about something that happened a long time ago. But to be able to visually show, this is like a flashback. This is her telling you a story about what happened before, and then it sort of finishes. And there's another point where she says, well, the verse actually says, I was asleep. Oh, I was asleep, but my mind was awake, I think it says. But it means she was dreaming. So she was having a dream, and she has this weird dream, but it's so close to what happened in reality that people often go, oh, these two are both dreams, or they can't reconcile, why is this one so similar to this one? And it's because she's dreamt about something similar that actually happened, but in a dream it all went weird. Like, so she's like, I met these two guards in real life, And then in a dream, I met these two guards, and then they beat me, and they took away my cloak, and da da da. And, you know, so but when you can actually show that this is a dream, but this isn't a dream, visually, it really helps people to understand it.
And it's something that's a lot easier to do through artwork than it is through text sometimes, to show like that difference between a dream state versus reality. And
yeah, exactly.
That's so cool.
And like you say, you know, to help people understand it, normally, you know, you write a massive long commentary, and then they have to read the text, and then they have to read the commentary, and they have to kind of interpret the commentary into the text and understand it and remember it, you know. But with pictures, it just helps you, you know, see it all in one go and understand it, and your mind can just process so much more in images because it's all together and then words on top, you know. It's a, you know, like, where are they? Well, if you know, in an image, you just see them standing in a, you know, a place, and you can see what the place is. It's a city, it's a forest, it's a, you know. Well, in the text, it's not plain, but, you know, you'd have to have a commentary or something saying, oh, she says, you know, our bed is verdant, but the word means green, and it could mean that they're outside, and, you know, and all this commentaries, and like, and obviously they can't be too exact either. It's like, well, it could mean that, or it could mean that, you know. But when you just draw it that way, and they're, you know, they're outside and they're lying on the grass, and she says, oh, our bed is, you know, green, and the cedars are our roof, and that sort of thing, you know. It just helps you just see it straight away.
So obviously doing this, you had to read through Song of Songs a couple of times. Like, was there a particular chapter or verse that you feel like people just don't talk about as much as it needs to be?
I just think the whole book people don't talk about at all because they don't really get it a lot of the time.
Yeah, more than fair.
What and the other thing is, the other reason people don't talk about it is because there's the general idea. This is a book about, which in theory, in the full context of scripture, is about Jesus and the church. But I'm reading it now, and I'm thinking it's all about sex, and now I'm confused, and I don't really want to think about this, so I'm just going to read some other bit of the Bible. And that's what happens, I think, with a lot of people.
Yes.
And it is about sex sometimes, or it alludes to sex, or like, just, you know, like I said before with the palm tree thing, like, oh, I'm going to climb the palm tree and lay hold of its fruits. You know, but it's difficult because it's like, it is pointing to Jesus and the church, but in the sense that it is just also a literal marriage between a man and a woman. But the reason it points to Christ is because it's like, you know, the reason it like is a man and a woman is because it's all about their specific relationship and how they feel about each other, and it does relate to getting married and wanting to consummate their marriage because that's what they want to do because they're a young couple. So that's kind of where it kind of doesn't 100% like, you know, straightforward work. But where it does work is, it's like, okay, there's a woman who represents the church. There's the people who the first time they meet their king, they don't know he's a king because he's in disguise, and he seems like a normal bloke who's just a shepherd, and he's a poor shepherd bloke. But they fall in love with him after spending time with him, and then he goes away for a long time. Even they get betrothed, but then he goes away for a long time. But when he returns, it turns out, he's not just a shepherd; he's actually a king. I didn't know that, but he is. And then he brings me to his castle, his palace, or whatever. And then, you know, she's decked in jewelry and gold, and they're married, and then they're happy. Well, in that way, it is a point. It does point to Christ because it is a shadow. It's a very subtle hint, and it's the Jewish wedding thing where the bride and the groom get engaged, and the groom goes away and builds a house or extension on his father's house, and he brings the bride into his father's house, and all this imagery that Jesus says. And Jesus is like, I'm the bridegroom, by the way. Did everybody realize that I'm the bridegroom? Remember Song of Songs? Well, I'm the bridegroom, you know, and there's all this stuff that points to Christ. But then, but reading it and reading people's very sexual interpretations of stuff, I've not dismissed those things. I've looked at, is that what it's saying? Because sometimes you read stuff, you're like, oh, you know, that if that is an innuendo, that could be very, very sexual and very like hard to draw and all this sort of thing. But actually, when you really look at it and you look at a whole breadth of like commentators, you're like, no, I don't think it does mean that. So because there's a bit where it's like it's in her dream, but she's I'm in my bed and he's at the door and he's knocking to come in, and then she sort of says, oh, I'm already in bed, I don't really want to get out of bed, and he's like knocking at the door. She's like, oh, fine, I'll get up. And then she says, I put myrrh on my hands and they're dripping with myrrh as I go to open the door. And oh yeah, that's it. He tries to get in, so he thrusts his hand through the door and tries the lock, and then he disappears. But in those days, the way that locks, particularly rich people's locks, is they had a hole in the door and you reach through, and if you had the key, you could unlock it. You could unlock the bar by putting your arm through, and with the key, you can unlock the bar and pull the bar back. But if you don't have the key, you can't do it. But it means that you can put your arm through the door to try, which is what he does. But because that is a historical type of door, if you know what I mean, that is what she's talking about. Like, he's literally trying to get in, like, come into her room to see if she's in there by unlocking the door. And he finds it's locked and she's not letting him in, and he just goes away. But people go, oh, arm could mean his member and the door could be her, and it's all it's like, no, because in the context of the story, this is not the right part for them to be having sex anyway. So and it just doesn't work very well, and they sometimes people make too much of things, but it's funny because then there are other parts where it is what they're talking about when she's saying his left arm or his right arm is under my head, and and all this sort of thing, and they are talking about sex because he's clearly sort of lying on top of her and his arms underneath her head, so but they do consummate their marriage, so that is part of the story, but it's not terribly lewd, which is what people seem to think it is.
Yeah, it's so crazy growing up in the church, and there's been 2 times in my entire life, and I'm 32 right now, that I've heard a preacher preach on the Song of Songs, and that's insane. I mean, there are other books of the Bible I've never heard anyone preach on. I've never seen anyone bring up Obadiah, but that's because it's like one chapter, as opposed to we're avoiding this because people will be thinking the wrong thing. I've had, as a friend of mine who would not read the book of Song of Songs until after he got married. And I understand, but I think that's kind of putting it too much on a pedestal. I mean, it's intended for all of us. It's intended for those who are not going to get married. It's intended for those about to be married, who are married. So I just think it's funny how we as the church kind of look at this one book, some who just want to ignore it ever existed in the first place, and others who treat it like it's this forbidden fruit and we just could never look upon it. So I'm so happy to see you take this so seriously, to portray the book and its entirety through this beautiful artwork that you've produced. So I just want to praise you for that.
Well, thanks. Like, this is the thing. I think people do get scared of it, and it has the word breasts in it. It's like, oh no, but
we can't say that in church.
Like, I know exactly, but the tone at which the whole thing is delivered, I just think in their culture to say, oh, she has her breasts are very beautiful. It's the same as saying, oh, her eyes are very beautiful and her arms are very slender and she has very beautiful breasts. Brilliant. Like, we're like, oh, it's too sexual. But I just don't think it's like that in context. I don't think that's how it's delivered, and I don't think that's how a woman of that culture would receive it either. Like, oh my goodness, you're being a bit of a creep. It's like, no, I just think that it's just like saying, like, you have nice eyes and nice red lips and stuff. It's like, great, and so actually it's just funny because in some ways it's super saucy because it talks about breasts and people love making, but in another way it's not, because, well, of course they love making because they get married and that's how you have children and stuff. That's why you get married. Like, it's not like, because I think it's because our world is sort of perverted the whole thing so much that it's like, pornography and everything, sex sells and all this, to just literally talk about sex, like, they're going to get married and they're probably going to have sex. It's like, this is not a big revelation, but that's what they're talking about, in this poem. he's saying, well, there's a bit at the beginning, and he's like, well, she's talking quite saucily and stuff, but she says to him, but we're not, but we're not gonna. She implies we're not going to consummate our marriage until we're married. She says, "Let his banner over me be love," and that verse is taken out of context all the time. So they say about Jesus, "Oh, his banner over me be love," but it's what she's saying is banner, as in public statement, is he loves me, i.e., he's going to marry me, and that might sound too obscure, but the verse that links to it is, "You would take me into the banqueting hall," and that's what they're talking about. You take me to a banqueting hall to have a party, and your banner over me will be love. So you're going to like publicly marry me in a public place, and then we'll be able to consummate our marriage. And the whole book is the word that repeats all the way through is the little phrase is daughters of Jerusalem, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And people, sometimes construe that in different ways, but it seems to just be saying, don't like get really lustful and passionate if you're not going to be married. Like, wait until you're married before that you awaken love like that. And so it seems to be the whole theme of the book, like, that they get close to it, and then she says, strengthen me with raisins, I'm sick with love, and stuff like that. And then she says, but so you'll see in the comic, it just makes it so much plainer that what's happening between them. And the theme of the song is, we shouldn't be, they love each other and they want to have sex, but they're like, we can't have sex until we get married, so let's get engaged. And then he goes away and it turns out he's a king, and then they get married, and then they say, well, now we're getting married, let's consummate our marriage. And that's what they say. And it's funny because all the imagery is so it's kind of obvious, it's not hidden or whatever, but so she says about her, he says, your garden, you're like a garden, with like wonderful fruits and a fountain, but locked away, behind closed doors, a walled garden. And so he's saying, and he says, I'd like to get into the garden. So he's saying, I'd like to make love to you, but you're very chaste. So that's what he means by it being locked away. And then she says, well, come into your garden, it's time, essentially. So she's saying, come into the fruition of your marriage. And then that, like we were saying, that's the whole point of getting married, is, well, not the whole point, but you know what I mean? Like, that is what happens. People get married, have sex, have children, and that's the point of the book. But it's just, it's just weird that people get so like, they're talking about sex.
It's so sad that we, especially American culture, I don't know how British culture takes this as well, but we get so super focused on, we can't talk about this. We can talk about it behind closed doors between a married couple, but in front of the entire church, I don't want to be seen as lewd or bawdy. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
But
It's just getting that right balance of the biblical balance of, God made sex, it is good, and that's what he made it for a man and a woman to be married and have sex. That's nice. That's what God gave it to us for. But then it's when it's taken away too far, and then it gets ruined, and then people, I can't talk about it now.
Well, Simon, has there ever been a question you wish someone had ever asked you before this moment in time? Like, it's never come up once, like, please just ask this.
I don't know. I can't think on the spot, but I mean, I'm just going to point you back to the fact that people are like, oh, what are you going to do about Song of Songs then? So that was when I was like, what am I going to do about that? And that's why I wanted to look into it and stuff. And that's why I did. And I found actually it's not as bad as people make out. So, but there's so much misunderstanding. And even in Facebook, so we've got the Kickstarter going, you got Facebook comments, and people are like, no, it means this, and it's very lewd. And you're like, I don't mean it does, mate. So, yeah.
Okay. Joe, you have anything you want to ask?
Yeah, I mean, so with doing something like this,
Oh, he's
Oh,
dropped off.
we lost Joe.
We did.
Well, guys, Joe's
He obviously
dead.
knew before we did.
We mourn him. So I guess to fill the space here, since it's going to be in the video regardless, because I don't think we're editing this.
He'll probably pop back in a second.
Hopefully so. But let's see. What can I ask real quick? I've already asked how you're doing today. How's the weather in jolly old England right now?
Well, it's good, but I think perhaps what we haven't talked about very much is the fact that we've got the Kickstarter. Obviously, it's been mentioned, but it's going really well. I think by the time that people get to view this, it'll be about a week or so from the end. So it's really important for people to go and check it out. They can get the reason that it's, why would you back the Kickstarter? The reason is you get a special Kickstarter version of the book. It's got a slightly different cover. It's got a special laminate on the cover. It's part of a limited run that's slightly different to the mainstream book that you get in the thing. You can also pick up all the previous books, and and they're also at a discount as well. So if you get them through the Kickstarter, a lot of them you save several pounds. If you buy all of them together, you get a big bundle deal, and there's Spanish ones on there, and then they're at a really, really low price. And and you just get to join in and be part of the whole thing, which is crowdfunding something and getting behind it at the early stage and seeing it made and getting it first, so people receive it about 6 months before it comes to the shops and everything. So
Okay.
Now I wonder if Joe can hear us and if he can speak.
Looks like he's having some mic issues. I can see that on my end.
Right.
So right now you have, once again, if I miss anything, correct me like you did earlier, and I appreciate that. So you have Joshua Judges Ruth, Esther. You're doing the Song of Songs right now. You said the Book of Mark.
And Jonah is the other
Jonah
Old Testament book. Yeah, Mark, Luke, and Matthew.
Mark, Luke, and Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Jonah. I'm actually reading through the Book of Jonah for my Hebrew class right now, my syntax and exegesis class. What a wild story. And I've read that book so many times over, but to actually see who Jonah is as a character.
Yeah.
It's just man, you are so close to God and you don't get it.
Yeah. It's funny. I had a realization running through that as a comic because, so, you put speech bubbles, right? And then if you ever read Asterix, we do it similar, where if people speak in a different language, it's a different typeface. And Jonah, obviously, he's a Hebrew person, so obviously speaks Hebrew. He's a royal prophet, as we find out from one of the other books. But then he goes on a boat with a bunch of people, and then he can talk to them, and they're probably Phoenician, so he can probably speak that as well. They're not Hebrews,
yes,
we know, because they're like, "Who are you?" And they're like, who is a Hebrew guy? So we know they're not Hebrews, so they're speaking a different language. He can speak to them, and then he goes all the way to Nineveh, and then he can speak to them. So
yes.
he can speak 3 languages minimum, and it's funny because you think, because sometimes when you hear that story about Jonah, you just think, why didn't God just choose someone else? And obviously it's not necessarily unique, but I think it's significant that Jonah had a sort of set of skills that God wanted to utilize, and he wanted, and he decided he was going to use Jonah, so he did. But it's just interesting, this guy can seems to be able to speak 3 languages, and the people are going to be able to understand him and everything. So yeah, it's it's an interesting sort of thought about Jonah and how perhaps it isn't anybody could just do the job if God spoke to them.
I just find it so fascinating that the entire book, this is true of scripture as well when it comes to the Hebrew nation, is the one person who has a relationship with God and knows his laws and statutes, acts like the most sinful person in the world, and the godless heathens supposedly are the ones who repent, who bring sacrifices to God and show love and devotion to him.
Mm.
And isn't that just the funniest thing in the world?
Yeah,
that how good God is.
And obviously right at the end, Jonah gets really angry about, oh God, how can you forgive them, and blah blah blah. In each of the comics, we have a little verse at the beginning, this is Jonah, and then at the very beginning, there's a verse that's from a different part of the Bible, that's part of the intro. But in And so in Jonah, it's what then shall we say? Is God unjust? Not at all, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So it's like, it's a verse which, when you understand the story or whatever, you're like, oh yeah, I see. That's
Yeah.
what the point of the story is. Like, that God's like, if I want to have compassion, I will. Like, and it's not up to you. You might hate them and fear them and stuff, but so yeah, but so it's always fun to choose the little verse at the beginning of the book that kind of encapsulates the spirit of what it is. And on our Facebook group at the moment, people are kind of voting on as like, these are like some of the ones that I thought about for Song of Songs, and people get to suggest other ones and stuff. And in the past, I think on Matthew, somebody suggested one that I didn't, and it was the one we used. It was a Jeremiah quote. But
I was good at getting audience participation into that, so you can do that on the Facebook group.
yeah, so so we've got the Facebook group is the primary place where it happens, but we've got the Facebook page, and there's a Instagram and Twitter and all this stuff. So generally, a lot of the posts will go out in all those places, so you'll be able to comment on Twitter, and with the cover, for example, is another place where we get people to participate, because it's good for them, but it's good for me because I need to know which one do people like, because I like this one, but it might not be the same. And then people tell me why they like it as well, which really helps, because then it's like, okay, well, this one was popular, but only because they would like this little bit of it. So I can just take that little bit of it and put it on this much more popular one. And then they got both, and then everybody will like it. And then, so, it's really nice. And people see the kind of development then of the cover. And with the current one, Song of Songs, it's actually a good example because, I did a bunch of covers, and one had a woman dancing, and and one just had the man's face and the woman's face facing, and these were the popular ones. And somebody suggested, why don't you do a negative space image? And I don't think he actually meant necessarily what I did, but what I did do is a negative space image, where so in the end, it's the two couples are kissing, and then the negative space in the middle is a little lamb. So it, obviously points to Jesus, but it also points to all these examples of little goats and lambs and sheep and stuff like that in the book. So it's like a double, meaning in a way. So when you see the cover from like across the room or whatever, you just see like this kind of dark cover with a little lamb on it, and then as you get closer, you realize, oh, there's two people kissing. So yeah, but people participating helps that process along.
All right, so guys, Joe had to get out. His audio and his video wasn't working like it should have. So unfortunately, it's just the two of us, even though that's still a good pair to have talking to all of you. So, Simon, is there anything else you'd like to discuss before we start wrapping things up?
No, I think we've kind of covered it, especially because we covered, the Kickstarter, so people can go there. As I say, the best place to do that. And in fact, I would encourage you to go to the website first and click the link on the website, rather than just going there and looking it up on Facebook. On Kickstarter, because of they run metrics on where do these people come from, and or if there's also, in theory, there's going to be a link at the bottom of this video, so that would be nice and easy for you. You can just click on that, and that would be a great one to use. So head there. But yeah, if you want to be part of the dialogue, part of the research and that sort of thing, I often go to my followers on Facebook and say, what do you think about this? Or what have people heard about this? What's your opinion about that? So even doing Song of Songs, at the very beginning, I was like, I'm thinking about doing Song of Songs. What do people think? And most people were very supportive. And some people were like, don't do it. But I was like, why? But why are you saying that? And there was two people who were like, very like, no, you shouldn't. But you drill down into why. And it's because they think it's going to be done in a different way than I was going to do it. So it's like, okay.
Okay. So we already mentioned a Kickstarter. You mentioned a Facebook group as well. So after the Song of Songs is completed, you got your Kickstarter done. What do you think is going to be your next project?
Started working already on acts. Often I keep these books under wraps until nearer the time, but people know I've been basically heading towards acts for a while, because I did Luke to facilitate doing acts, essentially.
Makes sense.
Yeah. About probably 2 years ago now, I was like, what books do people really, really want to see? Like, and I thought it'd be like Revelation and stuff. But Acts was above Revelation, and I was like, well, if I could do Acts, I kind of got to do Luke first. I'm going to do Luke, and then I'm going to and then I'm going to do Acts, but I wanted to do a little short book in the middle. And then and I had no idea what I was going to do until, as I say, I was at a men's conference. People were like, "Oh, we should do Song of Songs." And so many people said it. I was like, "Do you know what? I think this is the Lord telling me I should do Song of Songs." And so that's what I did. But yeah, but they're going to keep coming. So people follow us. Subscribe to our newsletter. We only send out once a month, so it's 12 emails a year, but it'll keep you up to date with what we're doing. We recently got the books into prison ministries and stuff like that, which is really exciting. And so you get updates like that. You'll get to weigh in on covers and stuff like that, and you'll get notified when we do a Kickstarter. So we did a surprise Kickstarter at Christmas for our Christmas book. We kind of were planning to do it in this coming year, but we're like, do you know what? We're ready. We could do it now. Let's just do it. And so we did it all of a sudden. So people on the newsletter got to know that first. So that's good. But if people pick up this video, a few months down the line and the Kickstarter's ended, you can always join us on Patreon as well. People come back for like $1 a month or $10 a month or whatever they want, and they get to see stuff very much ahead of time. So while I'm actually creating pages, they kind of get to see it like a year often ahead of time. So I'm just posting the last few pages of that in there now, but they've been having the pages from Song of Songs for like last few months. So yeah, that's another thing for another way for people to join us, to support the projects. Obviously, financially that supports us, but you get to see the pages ahead of time, and you get a chance to then say, "Why did you do it like that?" And I thought this verse meant this, and is that right? And that's sometimes what people do. So it's helpful for people to see it before it kind of gets published and get to weigh in.
Excellent. So as we wrap up today, Simon, do you have any recommendations for anyone? Doesn't have to be anything we talked about today or on topic. Could be completely off base from this.
I don't know.
Why don't I go ahead and give you some time to think?
Yeah. Have you got any suggestions yourself?
Oh, yeah. Well, I am rewatching The Twilight Zone right now. It's been a while since I've gone through the whole thing, and I just got through a couple of really great episodes, including like The Eye of the Beholder and which is the one I can't remember. Oh, The Howling Man, where they have Satan bound up in a monastery somewhere. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Like there's some timeless stories, guys. Like the monsters are due on Maple Street. You could rewrite that today, basically change about next to nothing except technology, and it would still make sense, guys. If you haven't watched The Twilight Zone, watch The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I really like Star Wars, and I've been really enjoying The Mandalorian and
good choice,
and all that stuff, and Bad Batch, and all the spin-off series, and all that and everything. I just think it's just the series are doing so well. And I guess earlier we were talking about Hellboy. If there's people watching this and they're like a Christian or something, like, oh, I couldn't read Hellboy. It's anti-Christian or something. You need to know it isn't. So Mike Mignola, although he, don't know if he's very practicing, he's like from a Catholic background, and it has a lot of biblical tie-ins and stuff like that. So I think you'd enjoy it, and it's not offensive or anything like that. It's just a fantasy kind of thing that. Yeah, and it's very enjoyable, and the artwork's very good.
Well, all right, guys. Thank you for listening to this video. Check out our website at systematicgeekology.org. Find our shop there, as well as also to introduce episode ideas you want us to do. Like, you have something you really want us to discuss, like we will find someone to do it. We also are on Discord as well. Join us there. We have a Twitter, YouTube. Obviously, you're watching us here. We have our Patreon as well. Please help us out with the money as well if you can, but also check out Simon here with the Word for Word Bible comic. Guys, this man does excellent work. I still don't have mine yet. It's going to be on the way soon when I get money, which is soon. So I'm really looking forward to getting my own copy. But before all this, remember, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.